In 5th century Greece, Athens was a prosperous city-state which was in a golden age of avid scholarship and rich culture. One important figure during this time was Protagoras, a traveller, teacher, and chief of the Sophists. Sophists earn their living by offering teaching services in rhetoric and oratory, and since public speaking was so highly valued in ancient Athens, it was a profitable profession. However, it is known that legendary philosophers Socrates and Plato disliked the Sophists because they offered their teachings in return for money, which implied that they taught students how to win arguments, but not how to value and discover truth. In fact, this led to the term sophist carrying the negative connotation it still has today in referring to somebody as intellectually disingenuous. Truth, according to Socrates and Plato, should not be for sale. This denigratory view of the Sophists is, although arguably more justified than not, at the same time not entirely fair. In addition to teaching rhetoric and oratory skills, they also usually encouraged a thorough education of multiple disciplines such as mathematics, philosophy, art, literature, and politics. Although they were bracketed together, the Sophists were individual teachers rather than an organized group, so to generalize them so harshly may be unfaithful to their cause. Moving now to Protagoras, what we know of him is small compared to some other thinkers of the time due to his writings being believed to have been publicly burned. Nevertheless, his ideas were well documented by Plato in his dialogues. Due to Protagoras' extensive experience in communicating with others and sharing ideas as a teacher, he observed that every argument has two sides and that both may be equally valid. In the context of law but also general discourse, he argued that he could, quote, make the worst case the better by using the power of rhetoric to strengthen an argument. In this sense, he advocated for subjectivity being at the heart of conviction, and that a person's presentation of a view can be as valuable as the argument itself. Whilst this style of reasoning was commonplace in law and politics at the time, it was its application to philosophy that was novel. This informs Protagoras' most famous maxim: man is the measure of all things, meaning that each person holds a unique view and that when they differ, there is no objective truth in virtue of which one is right and the other wrong. His conclusion, therefore, is that nothing is inherently good and something is ethical or right only because a person or society judges it so. Protagoras recognized that everyone's personal history and experiences that develop over their life profoundly define their judgments, opinions, and conclusions about what is true. Such a philosophy is called relativism. This concept of individual relativity was provocative at the time, though he did affirm that the views of others ought to be respected even under conflict, helping to enrich the culture of democratic debate in ancient Athens. It is worth mentioning that Protagoras, inspired by his philosophy of relativism, was an agnostic on the basis that if something is not able to be known, it does not exist. It's reported that in his lost work, On the Gods, he wrote, "Concerning the gods, I have no means of knowing whether they exist or not, nor of what sort they may be, because of the obscurity of the subject and the brevity of human life." With this said, he still thought it was pragmatic to believe the gods existed anyway, as it led to utilitarian benefits for the individual and society. In an event debated by scholars, this proclamation on gods provoked uproar, which resulted in his exile from Athens and his writings being burned. This goes to show that even in times of freedom of thought and democracy, this was not enough to stop political suppression in ancient times. Now that Protagoras' philosophy has been outlined, some criticisms against him and his views will now be considered. Plato wrote, "If what every man believes as a result of perception is indeed to be true for him, if, just as no one is to be a better judge of what another experiences, so no one is better entitled to consider whether what another thinks is true or false." Plato follows this by asserting that Protagoras' philosophy provides with an all too convenient exemption from his own theory, and that relativism is true for him yet false for those who don't believe it. By asserting that truth is relative, Protagoras could then posit whichever further theory he proposed must be true. This demonstrates Protagoras' teachings to not only have been conceived as controversial, but as him having suspicious intentions behind his ideas as perceived by Plato. Though part of this criticism is an attack on Protagoras' profession rather than his philosophy. Aristotle also had concerns with Protagoras' philosophy by writing, "Man is the measure of all things. means that what seems to each man is so, then since things seem different to different people, the same thing will be and not be. What Aristotle is saying in this passage is that relativism commits the fallacy of non-contradiction, since objective reality must exist independent of individual minds. Aristotle seeks to demonstrate that relying solely on subjective experiences to define truth invokes logical absurdities. Whilst Aristotle makes a valid point, he may have made a contextual misinterpretation. Protagoras may not have meant truth is completely subjective and arbitrary, but rather he was highlighting the deceiving nature of subjective experiences in perceiving reality. Also, it could be argued that Protagoras was exercising epistemic humility. By calling out the fallibility of human knowledge, perhaps he was emphasizing the limitations of our mental faculties and the need for open-mindedness and tolerance because of this. In other words, accepting that different people possess different perspectives does not necessarily lead to logical contradictions, but instead acknowledges the complexity of human experiences and the importance of engaging in dialogue to broaden our understanding of the world. To conclude, Protagoras with his concept of relativism played a significant role in shaping philosophical discourse and challenging conventional notions of truth and morality. He believed that the only truths are relative ones because all we can do is subjectively judge for ourselves what we observe, to then come to our best conclusions. Astoundingly, Protagoras lived through a time in history that was in its infancy of knowledge about reality, yet he still managed to pose questions that are still relevant today. I've been James Bergman, also known as Ahead of the Curve, and I hope you found this video to be interesting and or useful. If you have any of your own thoughts on this topic that you would like to share, then feel free to comment below. If you want to support this channel to help me produce more content like this, then the links to my Patreon and PayPal are in the description. Thank you for watching, and make sure you subscribe to this channel for more, and don't forget to leave a like if you haven't already. Stay tuned for the next video.